Hello and welcome to another edition of Empathy at the Table. Buckle up, get ready. This is going to be a really interesting conversation. We always talk about negotiation and the different verticals of negotiation. And today is an example of another vertical within the negotiation field. On the podcast today, we have Joe Dillon, who spent nearly 30 years at the negotiation table. Many of those in what we would call the typical negotiation, litigation, contracts, business negotiation. But also, he is the co-founder of Equitable Mediation Services. And this is a pioneer of virtual divorce mediation. So Joe has helped over 1,000 couples navigate one of the most emotionally charged negotiations of their lives, divorce. His approach is built on the belief that empathy is not a soft skill, it's a strategic advantage. Joe holds an MBA in finance and negotiation training from Harvard, MIT, Northwestern, and he's currently co-authoring a book called Every Marriage is a Negotiation. And this challenges the win at all costs approach that we may see in the mainstream today. So I'm looking forward to unpacking this whole idea, this whole world of mediation in probably, yes, one of the most emotionally charged negotiations many people can ever have in their lives. So please welcome Joe Dillon to Empathy at the Table.
Thanks for having me, Tony. I hope I live up to that introduction. That's quite an intro, my friend.
It is. So we've got high hopes for you here, Joe.
Okay. I'll do my best.
No pressure. No pressure. I think I always like to start off with just kind of sharing your trajectory into this body of work that you do. I'm always interested that people who are in this field, because it's not one of those fields that was in the school curriculum, right? Negotiation trainer or mediation, divorce lawyer mediation. And so what was your trajectory into this area that you're working in currently?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it really started because I was working in sales departments. And the department, and typically in a company, I worked for publishers, and in these companies, there's a department of sales, and then there's a department of sales administration. So you've got the people out on the street, and then you've got all of us back in the office, making things happen. What I found was, and where I was as the director of sales administration for the IEEE, which is a technical publishing company, we had salespeople on the street, and of course, salespeople are commissioned individuals, and they only get paid when the contract is signed. So their only interest is sign. I don't care what it says, just sign. I don't care if we get paid. I still get paid. That's all they're concerned about. So I had those folks reporting into me. Then I had the legal department reporting into me. And anyone who has ever worked in a company with the legal department really knows that the legal department must get paid by the no, meaning every time they get to say no, they get a bonus. And therefore, the legal department wanted to not give an inch at all. Meanwhile, the salespeople are like, sure, you want it? No problem. We'll give you 1,000 passwords, even though you only paid for one. They just don't care. And I found myself in the middle, and the customer would reach out to me and go, hi, Joe. I have $3 million I'd like to give your company, and you all can't seem to get out of your own way. You got the salespeople telling me the access is going to start today. I'm getting letters from your legal department saying the contract is invalid and we need to talk to your people. I just want to get started. Can you help me? And it started out as, in a way, I was kind of an internal multi-party negotiator between sales, the customer, and the legal department. And I found over time, what was interesting is by educating the salespeople as to why it was important that we not give away the product for free, and also to educate the legal department that says, okay, sure, there could be a chemical spill in our building, but there's an extremely small likelihood of that since we're an office building and a publisher and we don't print anything. We should really get in tune with each other to understand risk, reward, and how can we move this forward. So it was kind of that whole, we have an interest in collecting this customer's $3 million. And some of those contracts are even bigger than that. These are major publishers, Microsoft, AT&T, Intel, these are the big hitters that these companies that we were selling to. So that where it really boiled down to, and I really found myself enjoying making everybody happy, right? I was able to kind of get everybody to go, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yay, this is great. And then after doing that in corporate for a while, I said maybe I could strike out on my own. And I thought about what I would do. And my mother-in-law, of all people, said, I have a friend who's a mediator and she works with the police union. I lived in New Jersey in the United States at the time. And they were a police negotiator, getting the police union to talk to the government, to get the contract. And I spoke to her and I'm like, wow, this is fascinating. So I could do mediation privately. I wonder what it is I'd be interested in. So I did some exploration, and a little backstory that you might know about me is my parents litigated their divorce. They had one of those knockdown, drag-outs, letters, lawyers. I sat in the back of the courtroom, all of that stuff. And I said, that's it. I'm going to do divorce mediation. I'm going to help people avoid what happened to me. And here it is now, 18 years later in private practice. And that's my story, Tony. So long and
Wow.
windy road, but it's like hindsight's 2020.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense why I'm here where I am today.
Absolutely. When you connect the dots backwards, you can
Yeah.
see you're doing what you were actually born to do, right?
Right. Yeah.
I like what you said about this because actually my body of work is around this area of shifting how teams negotiate
Hmm.
internally. And so this idea of you said that sales, the customer, and finance, bringing them together around the table and letting them see that they're stakeholders in the the future of the company or a future deal
Right.
where all parties can walk away with a satisfactory outcome.
Yeah.
Um, when you so and you mentioned that you were in the middle, right? So it's no accident that that's what you started doing, and you're still in the middle, right? You're just in the middle in a different way.
Right.
And I looked at some of the stats, and I'll read these out here. Divorce rates 41% in the states.
Hmm.
Second marriages, the divorce rate is 60%.
Yep.
Third marriages, the divorce rate is
Yeah.
73%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Goodness me. So you must be busy.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. We've been noticing too the divorce rate, even statistically, when you look at those averages, the divorce rate's higher among what we call gray divorce here in the United States. I think silver divorce, it's been a phenomenon that's kind of been around for a while now. But, couples who have been married maybe 20, 25 years, they're in their 50s, their 60s, we're all living longer. And those are the
Yeah.
clients we're seeing more of, where they're saying, I played my traditional role. Forgive the stereotype because my mom was a quote unquote stay at home mom. I prefer to say my mom worked inside the home, whereas my dad worked outside of it because, hey, I'm an only child, but I was a handful. And so it was a full-time job keeping me in check. However, we're seeing couples as they're older and saying, well, if I'm going to live another 30 or 40 years as our life expectancy increases, why should I stay in this marriage? I want to be
Yeah.
happy. And what's interesting is these are the kinds of clients that are perfectly suited for mediation. The fire is now to an embers, just kind of crackling a little bit. They're very cordial with each other. They're very respectful to each other. I'm sure they still care deeply for each other. They just have found themselves going in different directions, and therefore they're just looking to take things in a new direction. And those are our best clients. The clients who are really high conflict, as you know, probably not ideally suited for mediation. We do get some of them, and we can help them if they let us help them. But
Mm.
oftentimes they're so stuck in their pattern, in their loop, that getting them to think about interest-based negotiation and giving
Yeah.
and getting versus extracting the pound of flesh and, we're trying to move you forward. Those cases are hard. So those statistics are interesting in how they're panning out. And we're seeing that, and we're seeing our client base shift older now. And that's been an interesting phenomenon.
That's fascinating. Um, I think I heard in one of your interviews you said that you alluded to the fact that you could tell couples by the books they read. I think that if you read spy books and all the and then you said that your
Yeah.
wife tends to read the Find Your Inner Peace, Your Inner Child. And
Right.
um, talk a little bit about the psychology that actually the role that you have to play almost as a psychologist in understanding what's men are from Mars and women are from Venus style.
Yeah, that's it's interesting when people say, "What's your job?" You say mediator, and sometimes people know what that is, but sometimes they don't. And I said the best way I could describe it is I'm part therapist, part cheerleader, and part lawyer. And even though I'm not a lawyer, right? But I'm just trying to get in my world, get people to understand how things work, encourage them to move forward and unpack everything that's going on for them. And as you said, a lot of it is in their heads and a lot of it is these repeated patterns over and over, these disappointments, these failures that they perceive in each other. And part of that role in my world is trying to figure out, okay, who's the driver? Who's the reluctant spouse? Are they both on the same page? What are each of your interests? What are their concerns? Because they might know them, but they don't articulate them. They don't have the words. They've been in this loop, if you will, for so long. And when I'll say something, there'll be that aha moment. And that's really rewarding. Part of the challenge I have, though, in my job is sometimes I have those aha moments and never say it out loud because my job is to be a divorce mediator. My job is to end your marriage, not to put you back together. But I have to be honest, there are days where I do walk out of the office and I shake my head and I'm like, they have no idea that they're in lockstep on like 98% of the things. They're letting these 2%, just bang, bang, bang. And it's a phrase that you may have heard me say before. I call it, you guys are in violent agreement, where they're just shouting so much at each other. And sometimes to break the tension, I'll laugh. And it gets them out of that loop. And they're like, it's an interrupter. And they look at you and they go, did we say something that's funny? I'm like, you guys are cracking me up. You have no idea. You're both saying the exact same thing. It's just that you're yelling so loud, neither of you can hear each other.
Yeah,
I'm like, you're afraid to lose the house. You're afraid to lose your job. It's basically financial security we're arguing about, right? Like, you're trying, and they look at you and they're like, I wish you were in our house. Like, I wish you were with us during our marriage. That's part of it, trying to unpack those things, feed them gently the information they need, and also to kind of clear out some of that so that they can let that go, let those arguments go so that they can make the decisions, for example, that they need to make in order to move forward with the divorce.
So let me ask you a question, and this might seem like a very obvious one, but I want to ask it anyway, just in case anybody was itching to know. As a divorce mediator, if a couple come to you having made a decision that they want to divorce, and then you speak to them and they actually realize, well, we're actually 98% aligned and we love each other, but there's this 2%. And then in the process, they say, oh, darling, let's give this one more shot. And they walk out of your office having decided not to divorce. Is that considered a failure on your part? Would you consider you hadn't done your job or?
Not at all.
Okay,
I'm always happy to lose a client, right? I'm happily married for 21 years, and believe me, it has its ups and downs. Anyone who's in any kind of relationship knows, even a friendship, a partnership, a marriage, there's good days and there's bad days. It's that you want the good days to outnumber the bad, and you don't let that break you. There are folks who sometimes it's a game of brinksmanship, and to me, that's simply a frustration in an inability to communicate. Then you sit across with a person like yourself, Tony, like me. Make no mistake. You and I are professional communicators. That's what we are. We can call ourselves mediators, negotiators, lawyers, whatever we want. But at the end of the day, we use words to help, to solve, to assist. And having a third party like myself, who my style is very directive. I'm not necessarily facilitative for the audience. The facilitative is more how does that make you feel? More the therapeutic kind of hanging back approach. I'm more of a directive person. As you mentioned, I have an MBA in finance. So I'm more of an analytical, tactical, how do we solve this problem guy? And a lot of times people who've come to me in therapy, they've had a therapeutic approach where they're talking about their feelings, and that's wonderful. And I'm a huge fan of therapy. So let me just put that right out there. If you've got some things to unpack, go. Absolutely. Yep. But sometimes in a couple, they need somebody to go, stop that. Stop doing that. Don't do that, right? Because it's not like, well, Bob, how does it make you feel when Sally says that you don't empty the dishwasher? No, just empty the darn dishwasher, right? And sometimes they get in front of me, they're kind of like, and I'm not being aggressive. Of course, I'm being friendly and I'm overstating for your audience. But at the end of the day, I'm saying, folks, if I hear both of you correctly, this is really what the issue is. can we work on this? And I have a client couple right now who they're in a situation like that. And I said to them, I said, I just want you to know what we're talking about right now isn't necessarily going to get you closer to your divorce. Like it's not really a mediation topic. I said, but if you're okay talking about it, I'm okay talking about it because I think this is a worthwhile conversation in your relationship to have. And it was about their roles and responsibilities in the household. And that's not going in anybody's divorce decree. You'll empty the dishwasher or you never folded the laundry. But it was a moment that perhaps could help them clear some grievances in the sense that then we could get talking about child support, something like that, right? You have to kind of sometimes clear the decks. And I do find myself in those conversations and do
Mm.
sometimes have, not often, but do sometimes have people who reconcile. And those are actually pretty good days in my world.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
those days, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. You also said that 70% of the time, it's the woman who's made the decision
Yeah.
to approach you, and
Hmm.
that they've typically been thinking about this for a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
That this is going on, and for the husband, it almost comes as a surprise. Can you
Yeah.
share what your ideas are around the philosophy of why men tend not to see this until it's just too late, and women have been kind of brewing on this for a while?
Yeah, certainly. Women, in my experience, and now again, this is a broad brush, so forgive me,
Sure,
but
sure.
women are more in tune with the emotional aspects of the relationship, the satisfaction, the family unit. And for whatever reason, whether it's biology, evolution, whatever you believe, societal, I'm not here to push an agenda. I'm simply saying that when it comes to those elements of a relationship, let's be fair, women tend to drive more of the emotional aspects of them. Men, on the other hand, and I find, by the way, I am guilty raising my hand. My wife, Cheryl, she's like, you're such a fixer. And I am. I'm a problem solver. My dad was an architect and a construction guy. He had to figure out how to build buildings so they didn't fall down. And so whenever I see something, I view it as a problem to solve. So men, when there's a relationship, they're solving the problem. They're working, they're providing, they're putting their kids through school, they're paying the mortgage, they're saving for retirement. And all of those things are critically important. And I do the same thing in our household. However, there is another aspect to a relationship and a marriage, and it's that emotional component that's often lacking in the male perspective. And that's what's driving the female. So in my conversations, a lot of those conversations I have where the woman is the driver of the divorce, they tend to, even though I try to steer them away, right? Because as we say, mediation is therapeutic, it's not therapy. However, we do try to get them in there and understand that their wife is explaining, I'm not saying, Bob and Sue, in case you haven't figured out, are my fictitious clients, my case study clients. We're not saying, Bob, that you didn't do excellent work and that Sue's not proud of you, that you're the COO and that you have saved a lot for retirement and your house is beautiful. But she also wanted to go to dinner on a Friday night and put on a nice dress. Or she also wanted you there on the sidelines yelling at the ref that it was unfair at the soccer game. And you promised you were going to be there and you weren't because you were doing that role, which was critically important. However, there's more to it. And that's what I think in our modern society, my dad was home. Like I said, he was in construction. So he worked with union guys who worked 7 to 3:30. And at 3:30, that job site had to shut down. My dad
Mm.
was home at like 4 o'clock. Like most dads were home 5:30. And I'm used to that work-life balance. Most folks today, like, with what we see in the news or whatever, or just talk to our friends and colleagues, they're not home until 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. What family balance are you having? And I think women especially women who have worked inside the home in these long-term relationships, they had the kids to keep them busy. Most people that I work
Mhm.
with have at least
Right.
2 kids. So they've been busy for probably 20 years. Now both are in college, graduate, empty nest. The wife is like, well, I don't have a husband and I don't have kids to care for anymore. So what am I doing here? I think it's time for me to do something else. And that's what I'm seeing a lot of.
Mm. I can imagine, though, it must, having this retrospective conversation about the things that I didn't do. But obviously, I
Yeah.
can't change, right? The things that I didn't do. I can imagine that there would be a high level of defensive frustration on the other person's part. Why didn't you tell me all this time? You didn't say anything. And then I
Right.
could also imagine that your role is to say, Bob, she was telling you, but you just weren't listening, right?
Yeah. Yep. That does happen a lot. And
Yeah,
part of being, as you and I talked about, being the cheerleader in that case is being very careful, because these gentlemen that we work with, as powerful as they are, they're very sensitive. They're
yeah,
used to having the team, you know, praise them and report to them. They're used to being the masters of their domain. So to have someone that they perhaps perceive as, we say the fairer spouse, to be a little old fashioned here, but to perceive someone who, well, why are you doing this? Like, it's almost like a how dare you want a divorce. They're shocked that how could this person not love and respect me? Because you're not paying attention to them in the way they
mm,
need you to. Plus, they don't report to you. They don't
right,
have to be nice to you. They don't, they want to be there, right? I mean, my wife and I always say this, like, one of the things I'm most proud about with my wife is she's a very independent woman. And I said, one of my favorite things about you is that I know that you want to be here, not that you have to or you need to. And God, I hope, I'm knocking on my wooden desk. I hope that I don't leave this planet prematurely. I said, but you know what? I know that if I were to ever no longer be here, you will be okay because
you'll
you're a
be
capable
okay.
person. And that's a
Yeah,
comforting feeling. That's a partnership. And a lot of times when people in these marriages, what I've noticed is they've defined their partnership. And this is something that we might get into, is in what I call the I've decided pattern. They get into a place in their relationship where someone makes a decision. And in the beginning, when somebody makes a decision or tells you what to do, it feels like we made it. But then after a while, and I see this pattern a lot with the what we call the executives and the working inside the home, you get this executive person who says, well, we decided you would stay home. And then Tony,
yeah.
if I had $1 for every time I got this snapback, we
Wow.
didn't decide.
Wow,
You
yeah,
decided I was going to stay home. Right?
yeah,
You're laughing because you've probably heard that too. And I'm like,
yeah.
well, that's what gets you where you are now, because over time, all those I've decideds have kind of broken the partnership. And so now each of you has now made decisions independent of each other, and you're no longer operating as a team. You're operating as two coexisting individuals. That's
Mm.
not going to sustain a relationship. And that's a pattern I see a lot of.
So what about on the flip side, then men who ask for divorce, men who actually the other 30% of your clients
Yeah.
presumably would be men who have decided. How does
Mhm.
that play out?
So two camps. First is kind of the opposite of what we're talking about, is the spouse, in this case, the wife, isn't perhaps adhering to his cultural norms. Perhaps she wants to go back to school. She wants to go to work. Well, you've always been home. Why would you do that? Right? It's like, well, because I've been home and I'd like to now go get a master's degree, for example, right? Just something like that. So I think that's I saw that earlier in my career. We see it a little less now, but there's a stereotype that still exists, and there's that roles and responsibilities. The other part of it is literally the opposite of this. I'm busting my butt. I'm working hard. You're getting your hair done. You're getting your nails done. You're spending $5,000 on makeup a month. You're going lady who lunch. You're at the tennis club, and I'm sick of it. And it's not that the person probably minds us so much as there's no real perhaps acknowledgement of that. Like, I always say with Cheryl, I'm like, look, we have a dog, we have a house, we have a this, we have all of our chores. And there's just a very simple example, but my wife is the person who takes out the garbage. That's her role, right? We've decided I empty the dishwasher, she takes out the garbage. Okay. So that's in our house. Last night was garbage night. She collected up the garbage, and I was standing at the sink doing the dishes. I said, oh, hey, babe, thanks for taking out the trash. And she's like, oh, of course. Right.
Mm.
Because even though we literally sat down and decided that was her going to be her responsibility, I still said thank you. I still acknowledged and validated that, even though we all are clear that it's trash night and she has to take it out. In these situations, these gentlemen tend to be working very hard, very long. They're putting kids through private school. They're paying for, private horseback riding lessons, and they're starting to collapse under the weight of that. And if they just knew that there was some acknowledgement that, look, I know that you wanted to be at the dance recital. We missed you. We love you. We'll film it for you. We really appreciate what you're doing for this family. And one day, when you retire, it's going to be all about you. Those messages don't come through. And sometimes you need that, right? I still like to be told by my wife, like, hey, you look handsome today. It's just
Yeah.
little stuff that keeps those things going. That's what I'm mostly seeing.
So in these situations, there's A and B, right? There's always two camps, and
hmm
one typically will blame the other. And I always like to use this question that one of my great friends, and he's probably one of the best coaches I've ever met, Jerry Colonna, and he has this question which cuts straight through to the if you like the nub of what really goes on when you
hmm
have conflicts. And the question is, how are you complicit in creating the situation you say you don't want? And it's such a carefully crafted question because
Yeah.
it's not blaming you and saying you caused this, but it's heavy enough to let you to kind of open your consciousness to the fact that there was a part that you played in allowing this situation to happen that you
Sure.
now say you don't want. And when you presumably in mediation, you kind of I guess you would spend some time on that kind of reflection. When you have those type of reflections, what kind of things come up? What do the parties say?
Wow. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. You get people who, as you said, are defensive. What I'll say to clients is that it takes two to stay married, but it only takes one to get divorced. And that's part of it, is that when you ask a question like that, as we just alluded to earlier, and this is a study that I love to commonly reference. There's a law firm in the UK that asks their clients when they come in and seek a solicitor. I'll use the proper term. Um, they seek a solicitor and they say, how long have you been thinking about getting a divorce from the time you started thinking until the time you then booked an appointment and walked into our offices today? And they ask this question of everybody who comes in, and they issue it every year. The last one I saw, I think, was about 2 years ago. And at that time, the average was 25 months, 2 years
Wow.
and 1 month. So someone is not just going, what do I want for dinner? And do I want to get a divorce today? Yes, I do. It's not a snap decision. And that's where you say to folks, and you kind of quote that study to them, and you explain, you say, look, this is not and I'll turn to the person who's the driver and I'll say, just entertain me. How long have you been thinking about this? It's like 3 years. And the other person is sometimes shocked. What do you mean 3 years?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you remember when we went to therapy and then I asked you to come home early, then I asked you to put and they go through that whole litany. And then I can kind of look at the other person and say, well, it sounds like there were
Yeah.
some signs, right? And
Right,
that's the
right.
sort of sad aha moment for them.
Right. So at this stage, the milk is already rotten,
Yeah,
and you can't really go and unrotten the milk.
correct. And it's
And it's
hard.
how do we dispose of this in a way that causes least amount of aggravation on both sides?
Exactly. And when you get to that point,
Mm,
again, going back to the fixing, guys think they can
right.
fix
It's
everything.
too late. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
too late.
So pretty
Sometimes,
much,
yeah,
but
too
by the time they
broken.
show up in your office, it's already at the end, and it's a case
Yeah,
of how do we do this in a most amicable way? Is that what
absolutely.
happens? Right. And you also said that traditionally, when people go to a divorce lawyer, the divorce lawyer says, right, I'm going to screw them and I'm going to get you everything you want and you're going to end up with everything. And you say that's a false narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we all know as professional negotiators, when you get into a positional based bargaining, you're going to just grind yourself to something that neither party is happy with.
Yeah.
And there's no expanding the pie. There's no interest based negotiation. It's kill or be killed. And you'll spend a lot of money, a lot of time. And here in the United States, what's really interesting is, we practice mediation in multiple states, and some states are a little more flexible than others. But there are guidelines, there's frameworks, right? There's got to be a sandbox that we all have to play in. And the attorneys, and again, I'm not trying to bash attorneys here, but they're counting on the fact that you as the client aren't aware that the sandbox is pretty small. And eventually your settlement is going to wind up somewhere in a pretty tight range. Now, granted, if we're talking about trillions of dollars, 1% matters. But most of my clients have about, $100 or $200,000 in retirement and maybe $20,000 in a checking account and have a car. And these are not the folks who are worried about the, trillions of dollars. So if you're going to go to a lawyer, what are you arguing over? You're going to get another $50,
Right.
$100, and then you're going to have spent what, $100,000 to do that? Do that math, right? Yeah. What's your return on investment? If
Right.
I spent $100, $100,000 to get an additional $5 a month in child support, and my kid's 18 or 17, you're like, wow, you just way overpaid.
Yeah. And what's the profile of someone who tends to really succeed in your line of work? Would it
In my
be, I mean, yeah, male, female, what kind of age, experience, divorced themselves, or what would be the profile of someone who you would class as being successful in your industry?
Uh, for me, I think it boils down to two things. It boils down one to, and this is something that I call detached engagement, meaning if I had a colleague who once said, you don't get in the box. They're like, listen, you're on the outside of the box. The two people are in the box. You're looking inside the box. You're right at the edge of that box, Joe, but don't step inside the
Yeah,
box.
yeah, don't, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Don't get in the box. So to be able to be engaged, but still float above, float outside, step back. However, also what you have to remember is that, and it's not that you want to be losing sleep and, become a depressive person and sit in a dark room, but if you don't care about your clients when you turn off the light and you walk out of your office, if you're not still thinking about them a little bit, I think it's time to hang up your shingle because I'm
Mm,
not losing sleep. I'm not waking up at 4 a.m. going, gee, why couldn't they just work out that thing about the braces? I'm not doing
yeah,
that. But when I leave for the end of the day, like, and yesterday was a perfect example. I'm like, oh man, I hope they're going to be okay. You've got to have some empathy and connection, but not let it swallow you and not let it drive you. You still need to be somewhat detached. So that's one. And number two, I strongly believe someone with a financial or a numbers background or a strong grasp of numbers. Tony, let's be honest. What's a divorce? Parenting plan, child support, alimony, property division. Three of the four of those things are financial nature.
right.
So if you don't have at least some semblance of budgeting, spreadsheets, return on investment, taxes versus no taxes, you're going to have a hard time. And we tend to get a lot of complex clients where they have pensions and RSUs and stock options and they're entrepreneurs and they own businesses and things like that. And that's really for us, that's really our wheelhouse. Probably people see that because of my finance background. Not
Uh,
everybody has to have an MBA, I'm saying, but you do have to be well enough versed. And we see a lot of, I've had the privilege of being an instructor for divorce mediation training classes, and you'll get a lot of mental health professionals. And they're very good at the empathy and the conversation and the parenting plan. And then I'll follow up with them maybe a year later, and they're like, "Yeah, when it started coming to calculating child support or negotiating alimony, I just didn't know how to do it, so I punched out." And most of
wow.
them don't carry on with divorce mediation, so it's tricky. Not everybody in a finance background is going to be a divorce mediator, but I do think it's a very important skill to have.
Yeah, that's definitely one of those things I wouldn't have thought about.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it makes an awful lot of sense
Hmm.
because once you get people to the position where they're talking, well, what they want to talk about are those things, right? That's why they actually come. Once we can align ourselves emotionally and,
Right.
and ensure, then we can talk about the processes. What I
Hmm.
wanted to ask you is when you because I guess, are one of the rare cases where you've had you're in both camps. So
Yeah,
the you've done the mergers and the acquisitions, the business negotiations, and now you're doing like the emotionally charged style type
yeah,
of negotiations. And so in business, we're always told leave emotions out of it, right? Let's be
sure.
logical, even though it's not true. I mean, even though we do make decisions on emotion, but
Of
the
course.
narrative, the overarching narrative is right.
Mhm.
Let's focus on the data, what the data tells us. However, in your body of work now, it's the emotions make a raw, bombastic entry into the conversation, right? You have to deal with them. You can't say,
Mhm.
let's ignore the emotions and let's figure out the other stuff. How do you manage that transition? And how do people feel when you have to face the emotions head on?
This is our kind of process. And what we've learned over the years is it's it's much like there's a saying, it's sort of like don't let the animals run the zoo or the inmates run the asylum. Like there's a lot of different
Right.
versions of this. And when these folks are in this kind of dysfunctional relationship, they're looking for someone to control the process, in my opinion. And we have a very structured process that we move people through. And the way we started off is with a 1 hour strategy session. You notice the terminology, strategy session.
Hmm.
We come in there, and that's my opportunity to put down some rules of the road to kind of say, look, this is what this is and what it isn't. Please absorb this.
Hmm.
This is what I'll tolerate, what I won't. Here's what I need you to do. And then I give them about a half hour at the end basically to throw up, to kind of just, I say, okay, what are all the issues that you think we need to talk about while we're in mediation? And I'm going to just make a list, just shout them out, no judgment. I'll get them going. And some of them, I'll take all the notes, and some of them are, not something I can do anything about, or doesn't really matter, where we went on holiday 3 years ago because that was 3 years ago. It's over. But they want to hear that said out loud. And so I'm taking my notes, I'm working with them, I'm talking to them. I say, okay, great. So I'll use this as our strategy, and I'll use it to structure our conversation. And then this way, moving forward, we can make sure that we cover all these bases. And then, of course, there's some things I conveniently forget because we don't really need to know about X, Y, or Z, or we don't need to cover that. But I think by letting them vent that up front and calling it a strategy session, it kind of puts that message
Hmm.
that says, we're going to get through this in a structured way. And so doing it that way, giving them an opportunity to say all the stuff, and well, I want to talk about your boyfriend, and I want to talk about your mother-in-law, and okay, no problem. And then you can say to them, I hear you, absolutely. And then I have a little laptop off to the side that I'm typing on. I'm like, got it captured right here. And then I show them my notes. Let's make
Mm.
sure we talk about the mother-in-law. And then they feel heard. That's all I think people,
Yeah.
Tony, want, is they
Yeah.
want to feel heard. And
Yeah.
then they go in knowing this guy gets it. This guy gets me. He's got his list. He's going to make sure we talk about that boyfriend of hers, and we do. And they feel comfortable knowing that I'm going to do that for them. So I think it helps them self-regulate a bit.
Mm. Um, I think it's on your LinkedIn profile. It says less conflict, right? You
Right.
want less conflict, better outcomes,
Yeah.
and I looked at that and I thought, let me challenge you a little bit on that, because
Hmm.
I think conflict is healthy. I think conflict is good,
Hmm.
but it's how we handle it is the challenge.
Right.
So going into I work with companies, I work with leadership teams, founders, and I encourage conflict, but I call it healthy conflict, right? That
Yeah.
tension that exists there. So when you say that you want less conflict and better outcomes, can you kind of expand on that?
Yeah, certainly. My terminology for it is constructive conflict. Same
Okay.
thing. And that's exactly it. It's that this is a safe space to disagree.
Right.
How we communicate we disagree is when I refer to conflict. So I've got my PowerPoint slide that I put up on the Zoom call or whatever we're looking at, the screen we're looking at. And I'll say, okay, look, if you're going to be complaining voicing a vigorous, defense or concern. Please keep the language professional. Please, let's not make it inflammatory or accusatory. Certainly, you are entitled to be angry. I'm not going to insult you by telling you how to feel or not to feel. But if you're going to say something, please make sure it's based in fact and that there's merit behind it and that you can back that statement up. Not, and I'll give them an example. And one of my favorite examples is, you always do blank. And I'll say,
Yeah.
really, in fill in the but 27 years, they've never once gone to your families on Christmas. Never once. In
Right, right.
27. I find that really hard to believe. Yeah. Well, you know what I mean, Joe. I was just saying that they,
Yeah,
it's like, no, 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 we have to, right? And that's what I think helps them frame what I mean by constructive conflict. We can
great.
disagree and we can certainly, because that, as I agree with you, Tony, that's healthy. It's being able to have those disagreements and then saying, okay, now what? We find ourselves here. Naturally, we need to go over there because you want a divorce and that's where it happens, over that other place. How do we move from here to there? And that's when they can start kind of, little by little, with our help, of course, moving them to each other and trying to help them have those conversations. And again, I do think conflict is certainly, it arises from not feeling acknowledged and validated. That to
Yeah.
me, is one of those root causes. If somebody said, you know what, you're
Mm.
right, I was being a jerk, that argument would shut down immediately. In fact, the other person might be like, what? Something's wrong,
Mm.
who are you? Right. So,
Yeah, so I had this question to with regards stats. So the famous stat was 50% of marriages end in divorce, but now
sure.
it's 41. And I did a lot of research trying to find where that 50% came from, and I couldn't find the source. But 41% from divorce.com, I got all that stands. And
Mhm.
but even then, I heard somebody say something that really made me laugh, and she said, if you were taking a transatlantic flight, and the pilot said to you, ladies and gentlemen, we have a 41% chance that this flight will actually end in failure, but you are welcome to jump on the plane and just put your trust in me and my crew. 99% of people would say, no, thanks, I'm not taking that flight. And looking at these stats, why is it you think people still just walk headlong into the institution of marriage?
I think we are, I would say, arrogant enough to think that we are the exception. It's right. Like everybody, if you ask, are you a good driver? Everybody's like, oh, yeah, I'm an excellent driver. I'm an above
Right.
average driver. Well, how can everyone be an above average driver? That's it. And as long as we
Yeah.
feel that about ourselves, we feel like, well, of course, I'm going to be the one who is going to beat those statistics. But I do think also part of it, in using that analogy, you have no control. You're sitting in the plane and you're relying on on a pilot who is in charge of this flight. In a
Mm.
marriage, you are completely in control. You absolutely are. And now, granted, I want to be very clear about this because I do run into cases where addiction is an issue. And we do have clients where addiction, gambling, alcohol, what I call financial infidelity, these things really do crap up. And sometimes, I'm, again, not a doctor or a mental health professional, but I do believe that sometimes they are just baked into someone's DNA.
Mm.
And, everybody says, oh, well, you could stop drinking. Well, I have a really good friend who comes from a family of alcoholics, and boy, he's a great dude, and he tries and tries and tries and tries, and he sometimes falls off the wagon, and it's like there's just something in his wiring that makes him have that addictive personality. So those are the cases where perhaps you don't
Yeah.
really maybe have that much control in the relationship. However, this is an instance where I think a lot of us do have control. And what's interesting, and here's the last thing I'll say about this is, when we have so much control, it's amazing how many of us don't take control. We don't take the throttle or take the reins. We think, well, of course it's our choice. And then we say, oh, but it'll all work out. And then you get divorced and you're like, well, what did you do to make it not happen? Well, and so because we don't want to blame ourselves. We don't want to look at our own failure. We don't want to acknowledge that. Guess what? It takes two to tango. You guys have to work on this. You can't tell me as a human that if you're sitting across from your spouse at the dinner table and you get the one word answers and they're looking down at their phone while they're eating, you have a communication problem, my friend. It's like
Yeah.
maybe you need to bring that up and say, you know what, we maybe need to get some help here. And both parties need to be willing to do that. That's the difficulty. Sometimes, most of the times, there's one person driving the therapy conversation. The other one goes along reluctantly, says this isn't working, and then that other person files for divorce. So
Right.
there you go. And that's that.
Well, Joe, I really wish I could go on, and I've got so many other questions. We might have to do a part two on this because
Well,
I found
absolutely my pleasure to do so. And I'll get my microphone
fascinating.
working correct.
Fascinating. Just to finish off, Joe, will you share with us what is it you're working on right now? That's exciting, and how can our listeners find you?
So right now, I'm actually writing a book, and I I've learned how difficult it is to write a book, and so therefore I'm an avid reader, and I'm going to make a promise to every author out there that I'm now going to slow down my reading because I'm going to acknowledge and savor each of the pages that you have worked so diligently to put in front of me. I'm actually writing a book, and the working title right now is called "Every Marriage is a Negotiation." And it's applying the principles that I use in
Mm,
mediation to the marriage conversations. As we talked about earlier, I think therapy conversations leave people discussing their feelings, but there's nothing actionable that's going to help them solve that problem. And so my goal is to put together a methodology that they can use. So you're not a corporate raider. You're not, trying to do X, Y, or Z and take over some company. It's just trying to understand, how can I communicate with my spouse better, and how can I get an outcome and an action that helps us move forward? And that's really, with so many years of experience doing this, I've seen a lot of patterns evolve. I've seen a lot of epic failures, and they do fall into buckets. They really do. And that's my goal, is to write a book and basically put myself out of business. So I don't know if I'll do that. I don't know if I'll achieve that goal, but I'll give it my best shot, Tony.
fantastic. Joe, it's been fantastic talking to you. I've really genuinely
Yeah,
enjoyed
same
the
here.
conversation. I was looking forward to it when I started researching you, so it hasn't been a disappointment. It's been a real pleasure. And if you've enjoyed this, if you're listening in the audience, if you've enjoyed this conversation, please send us a comment, like, subscribe, and don't forget to join us again for our next edition of Empathy at the Table. Joe, Dillon, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tony.